morning to everybody listening out there today or watching, if you are. I am truly privileged to have a conversation today to the amazing Kate Christiansen, a lady I have known for quite a few years now and continue to enjoy her wisdom and her conversation in all the spaces that she chooses to play, and they could be many and varied. So good morning, Kate.
Andrew.
How are you?
I'm awesome, thank you. Good.
Excellent. I'll take awesome. I'll leave it at the first one. Just as an intro, Kate is a curly thinker. And for those of you who are on video, you can also see the wonderful curly locks as well. No pun intended there much. But she spent 30 years navigating complexity for a living. She shows ambitious leaders and teams how to use their head in disrupted environments so they can ask bigger questions, take braver steps, and deliver better results. My favorite word, better. One of my favorite words. Better. So that's so my take on all of that, and I agree with all those words. And I think one of the things I see Kate do is a fantastic listener and great with providing conversation and feedback and expertise and wisdom into situations that others may be less comfortable with. So again, lovely to have you here to have a conversation, Kate.
Thanks, Andrew.
My question that I begin with everybody, to the heart of this, the podcast is called Better People, Better Business. For a curly thinker who loves better, I'm just curious, what does that frame mean to you when you hear it? Better people, better business. How do you hear that? What do you see inside of that?
I think one of the things that I love about that is that the better people is at the front. Because in my experience, coming from a background, probably until about 8 years ago, I was, a leader in corporate, delivering good things and doing big things, which was exciting. But one of the reasons that I do what I do is that I believe that particularly in disrupted environments, we can often lose sight of the people element, and yet it's the people element and take care of the people, and the disruption becomes less disruptive. And when I look at things, so I do quite a lot of work in complex problem solving using curly thinking, and one of the things that kind of drove me to come up with curly thinking is that many of the problem-solving approaches or traditional problem-solving approaches are process-centric. They're not people-centric. And they ignore the human element that plays out when we find that what we expected to be happening, it doesn't happen. But if you can relate to the people element, then the process often takes care of itself. And in disrupted environments, I believe the process kind of becomes irrelevant because the process is based on a static environment. It's not based on disruption. So
yeah, lucky we don't have any disrupted environments right now.
Yeah. Thank goodness. Thank goodness it's all plain sailing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just normal in the last few years. Gosh, who could have thought of a more boring time? Yeah, boring piece of time in history. So inside of that, and talking about disruption, and again, just so everyone knows, none of this is pre-scripted. So sometimes I put people on the spot. Maybe this is one of those moments. But when you talk about disruption,
this is where I start shaking in my shoes.
Well, I'm also really curious around when you talk about disrupted environments or disruption, what does that mean to you? Like for people sitting out there going, okay, Kate works inside this space around disruption. How do I because am I part of that? Am I in that? Or how do I understand that world?
That's a really good question, Andrew. Hang on, let me just think about it. All right, okay. So one of the things the biggest challenges, and I think one of the things that makes disruption harder than it needs to be is that we talk about disrupted environments, like our environment is disrupted, and I talk about that a lot. But when it comes to disruption, the thing that is disrupted, there might be an event, there might be a change in our environment, but the disruption actually happens in our head.
Mm.
It's the what happens to our disrupted expectations, our disrupted values, our disrupted plans, our disrupted aspirations. When I talk about disruption, I'm talking about, yes, there's something has happened around you, but actually the way, if you try and focus on the complexity that's happening around you, that's how you feel overwhelmed, or that's why you feel overwhelmed, because it means that we try to understand something that cannot be understood. You cannot understand the kind of environment that we're working in now. So the alternative is to understand what is the disruption that happens between our ears, and how do I understand that, interpret that, and then work my way through it in some kind of structured way. So
that's really powerful. So yeah, great answer. And the metaphor, the picture that pops into my head as you're talking about that, the difference between what's going on out there, which largely we have little influence over. Macro, or pretty much no influence. Micro in our little world, still we have some control, but even that's a little bit elusive at times. But I guess the next piece I was going to think when you're talking about it was, it's like the Jaws movie, and the reason why that scene where Jaws is racing in is so impactful isn't the picture of a shark; it's the music, da dum da dum.
Yeah,
it's the other stuff. And what is happening
it's
in
that
here,
feeling,
and it's all from this thing going, ooh, and that's what I'm hearing in your conversation. That if we played, I don't know, Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies during the Jaws scene, it would be a far less impactful thing.
Yes.
So how do we work with this thing so that whatever is the Jaws extreme comment, but Jaws is swimming around there, but we're listening to the Sugar Plum Fairies, it becomes less impactful.
Yeah. And when you start to think of disruption as being between your ears and being what's happening in our heads, it simply by making that transition and going, okay, actually it's something in my head, therefore I can control it. I still feel it. It still has an impact on me, but it's something I can understand. In fact, I am the only one who can understand it because it's my head, nobody else's. And the other thing that I think we make disruption harder than it needs to be, or the experience of disruption harder than it needs to be, is that we treat it like a black box. A black box that in black box testing in IT or systems testing, you put an input into some program and then you look at the output that comes out at the end and you say, well, is that what we expected or not expected? You don't look in the black box to see what happened to get that output. Often when we talk about disruption or complexity or uncertainty, all of these things, but particularly disruption, we treat it as though it cannot be understood. And if you start to flip it to go, okay, I can understand disruption. I can understand what's actually happening in my head when I experience disruption, and how can I navigate it in a way that makes sense to me. Not that I have the full path ahead of me, but I can move forward. Then you start to really feel, oh, right, okay, I still feel disrupted, but I feel less freaked out and more focused. And once we get focused, we can start to use our brain. If you can't focus and you're into this discombobulated state, then your brain it's a magnificent beast, but it can't help you if you can't go, right, what am I doing? And that's a skill, but you've got to know how to do it. Yeah, it's
really good. And it's, that's some wisdom there.
My nose blown. Yeah.
Oh, good. There's some wisdom there for people to hit the 30-second rewind and have a listen again. And it is this, we're not going to discount that disruption is happening out there. And I look outside, there's disruption. It absolutely is. And it will continue to happen. Change is happening and will continue to happen. Things will upset our world or make it better, whichever way, or both. But it's both a disruption and not discounting any of that being true. Yeah. As you're saying, the opportunity, though, is to be able to work with, so how do I manage that? What do I think about that? What does that mean to me? And, we see people, and there's a piece here I think I need to call out too. It's not about being deluded. It's all going to be better. It's all going to be better. It's all going to be, no, stop. Yeah. Stuff's going on. Yeah. How are you going to choose to react to it? And as you said, clearing away the noise, clearing away this clutter, and just being able to think about it in a way that is useful and meaningful. Yeah. Really powerful.
And I think one of the challenges that we've had, and again, it's, the reason I came up with the phrase curly thinking, apart from the fact that I do happen to have curly hair, that's useful, but it's not the real reason, is that, in my view, we haven't had a way to engage with disruption in a useful way. And part of the reason for that is that you kind of need to have, in my view, you kind of need to have lived and breathed it to know it, have to experience it time and time and time again to go, that's interesting. There's some patterns that are happening here. So, and when you've done it often enough, you can say, okay, when a disruption happens, actually, these things happen. There is a sequence that goes with it. And if you can know where you are in that, what I call a moment, if you know where you are in that moment, you can kind of go, actually, I know where I am. I know what to expect when I'm here. And I know where I need to go next. And just those little things help to bring the stress down. Sorry.
Please.
I've been reflecting because I had someone say to me, Kate, you're talking about disruption and things. Does that mean you never get disrupted?
Yes.
Oh, look, I'm like the swan on the pond. But just this morning, so I have an experience at the moment. Andrew, you and I were talking about this before we started this discussion around next door but one to us is building a new house. Now, the plans for this house went in about 4 years ago, and it was a big house. And we live in an area, I live in an inner city suburb, so small blocks, and this is a big house. And what I've been reflecting on just over the last few days is, I don't know what the plan is. I don't know where this house is going. I don't know how high up it is. And just as I was coming into my office this morning, I noticed that there's a new level on it that I wasn't expecting. And so I think the key thing is, and this is stressful, right? So I'm reflecting on how the disruption is impacting me. And one of the, I guess, insights I've learned about myself through this process is that it's my expectation and that uncertainty that often we think about it as being uncertainty is one thing. X happens and, that creates uncertainty. But the reality is in our lives or in the workplace as humans, it's not one thing. So when the second story went on, I'd gone, all right, okay, there's the second story. I can adjust to that. I'll adjust my expectations. I'll smooth out my expectations. But then when the next level goes on, then it happens again. So in workplaces, as leaders and people in workplaces, what we're dealing with is the multiple effects of this. I've adjusted, gosh, uncertainty, I don't know what's going to happen. I've adjusted, uncertainty, what's going to happen. And it creates a friction that you kind of just need to go, oh, right, now what do I do? So in the answer to the person that said, Kate, do you feel, do you ever get disrupted? I'm thinking, holy moly. Yeah. This is from the experience of disruption is where where curly thinking comes from.
That's where the gift appears and arrives, and once you've hit that 6-story house 2 doors up,
exactly. And I'm cool as a cucumber.
Another level. Holy smokes! So with that conversation, and some of the people who listen, actually a lot of them come from leadership roles in organisations or their own business, and this whole better people, better business frame. I guess the question I've got is that's really powerful and insightful. So if I'm trying to do people better, because I believe that there's a linkage there that people better means business better.
Yep.
How can I apply some of the thinking stuff here around the people stuff? How do I think through that? How do I prepare for that?
Yeah. I think two things. And as a Kelly thinker, I reserve the right to cover more than two things as I go. So I shall start appearing as though I have a plan, and then I shall go off wherever my brain takes me.
Please.
But having just disrupted myself and gone, what were we talking about? Oh, yes, people leadership. So one of the things I talk a lot about, and I think of goes pretty much through everything, is around questions. And not just any old questions, is asking questions that make you think. And so asking questions of yourself, if you're a leader, asking questions of yourself that gets your thinking to go outside your comfort zone, but at the same time, asking questions of your teams, asking what they think, asking where they see this going, as opposed to, I think as leaders, we can often feel like we need to come in with all the answers. And that's not only is that a real pressure for us as leaders, and in some ways our teams we're all trained to look to the leader to say, well, give me the answer. But when you're in a disrupted environment, there are less answers. So it's much more empowering for you as a leader to ask the right question, or just to ask questions and be comfortable saying, actually, I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know where we are. What do you think? The second thing around questions is that I believe that many people underestimate the value of and the power of a question. So if let me think. So Andrew, if I asked you, what did you do yesterday? So in asking you, what did you do yesterday, I've got your brain cells to suddenly focus in on something in an instant, like like less than a second.
Yep.
And when you do that in a team, if you ask a team a question that is a question to help move people forward, then we talk a lot as leaders about alignment. Questions create alignment in less than a second, because everybody is thinking about the same thing at the same time. And if they're having a conversation, even if it's a tiny, tiny question, having a conversation about the answer to just a little question, they come together in that moment.
Yep.
So that'd be another thing. The third thing that wasn't on the agenda,
because it has to be a third thing at least,
because there is always a third thing, is that I talk a lot in Curly Thinking. I talk a lot about which side of the mountain are people on, because often disruption feels like you're trying to get over a mountain. And for leaders and recognizing humans, people, whether they're leaders or whether they're team members, whatever, they're still people, is that when there is disruption, because it happens in our head, the external thing is just the trigger. Because it happens in our head, it means that usually everybody is in a different place on the mountain. And when we're leaders, we can want everybody to be where we are on the mountain. And recognizing that sometimes we might be on the sunny side of the mountain, but other people are on the darker side. And the only way to get everybody over the mountain is to go to the side that they're on. And so that's my third off agenda item.
Not four. You don't want to go four.
I might.
We'll reserve. We'll hang on to that reservation.
I'll hang on to that one.
Yeah, and it's interesting when we even talk about leading, and using that metaphor of the mountain and where people are either side or all over it.
Yes.
I think the other assumption that a lot of people put on themselves is, as leaders, they say, well, if I'm the leader, I need to be out the front.
Yes.
Because that's what leaders do.
Yes.
I don't know. I have a view, but I'm also happy to hear your thoughts around that, because that kind of language always makes me much more curious around what people have seen, heard, or believe around what leading means.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's an assumption there that being out the front is possible. Right? So, and I think, again, it comes to the difference between static environments versus dynamic environments. In a static environment, being out the front is more possible because it's the road well traveled, right? So you can see the road, you can be out front, you can go 100 meters down the road because there is a road. It's much less easy, I would argue impossible, to be out the front in a highly disrupted environment, because that's like hacking through the Amazon. And one person hacking through the Amazon versus multiple people hacking to create a path is the only way it can be done. If you think about what a disrupted environment is, and by definition, there is no path. So you can't be out the front. Therefore, you have to change the way your leadership is. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so that's a good metaphor around the Amazonian cutting a path through the jungle. Sorry for our tree-loving folk. It's just a metaphor.
Oh gosh, yes.
But I think so. Yes. So using that metaphor, and if disruption is active, and I kind of think there's almost this conversation that I need to acknowledge and call out is, if you don't have disruption, you're probably not looking real hard, because most people, broad generalization here, have a level of disruption in their life. That's if you work with people, if you do stuff, if you have family, if you have community, if you live in, like maybe the monk on the hill has less disruption. Maybe it's about the only person. So I think it's really important. I think it's really important for people to kind of say, it's okay, you're not alone. Pretty much everyone else is, even if they're throwing their great LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever other nonsense, and saying how perfect life is. It isn't.
Yes.
Doesn't mean you can't be grateful for it, but it isn't. It's disrupted. It's just everywhere, which is why I love this whole ideology around how you acknowledge it and how you talk to it and how you embrace it and how you kind of have this frame around curly, because if people aren't dealing with a couple of curly things, to use the way it's meant, then I'd suspect that, again, you're probably missing a few things, because this curly stuff's always going on.
It's always there.
And we have beautiful runs where it appears less curly.
Yes.
But it's still curly.
Yeah.
the leadership piece, to me, that again, this is one of those paradigms that I love to challenge in a useful way, is because we do have this story about leading always need to be in the front.
Yeah.
And leadership is about where you need to be to lead best, to me. And there are times when beside or behind are more important than being in front. If we need to use positional conversation, there are times when, let's talk about different analogies. The sports coach isn't on the field. He or she is sitting in a box, sitting on the bench, whatever it might be, and they're directing. There are absolutely times where, the leader, like a mountain hiking or mountain climb, people go, the leader's at the front. Well, no, usually the Sherpas are characters who are leading the front, and the person who's leading is amongst the middle. And there are also times when the person needs to be up front saying, come on, follow me, this is the way. And to your metaphor, you have to be conscious of just how far that is, because it's a seriously disrupted space. The Amazon is growing right behind wherever you've just cut. Yeah. So if you're hacking away and you're 200 to 500 meters ahead in a seriously thick environment, people may lose the trail. Yeah. So it's that, for me, leadership's all about understanding what's being called for, positionally, if we need to use that, and how connected or close you are so that people don't lose sight of what is being led and the leader themselves. That's my thought.
And underlying that, and I guess coming back to that I guess the mindset behind the power of questions, like that the willingness as a leader to acknowledge that you don't have all the answers. And when especially I work a lot with technical experts, engineers. Now, engineers that follow the laws of physics, and we talk curly conversations. And one of the things that they find useful is that sometimes they're talking about something that they've done over and over again, and it warrants a straightforward, straight down the line, A to B conversation because it's working. They've done it before. Yeah, they might need to tweak it, but they know 99% of what is in that conversation.
Yep.
What they find useful with the curly thinking approach is that it gives them a trigger to change the conversation and to go, actually, I think we're having, isn't this a bit of a curly conversation? So then they go, right, hang on, I'll just turn down my engineering A to B logic and go, right, well, what's the question that we need to answer? Like it's just a shift in thinking. And as a leader, and when you have a team, the ability to do that is invaluable because as the leader, I might go, hey, I think this is a curly conversation. We need to switch our approach. If your team don't have that language, if they aren't aware of when a curly conversation is needed or curly thinking is needed, sometimes your team can be heading A to B. You're the leader trying to say, yeah, well, hey, I think we need to think about this differently. But your teams run off because they think we're just going with the status quo. That's how this works.
It's interesting. Just as you're talking there, the other picture that is being painted in my mind is often. So we talk about better people, better business, and there's a collectivism in here that is deliberate. One of the things we regularly talk about with people who coming in the podcast is this idea that business isn't anything apart from a bit of paper. A business is a bunch of people. Like if you try to create a conversation beyond the people that create the business, it's pretty shallow. Brand and stuff. Yeah, all of that is done or undone with the people that are in it. How the mighty have fallen. It's about people. How the amazing rise. It's about the people. And how they think and what they do and how they show up. But one of the things when you talk about that whole, an individual, there are some people out there, and I'm one of them, who has a certain, like, my challenge is I love wondering, and I don't mean I'd leave it, like actually going, I wonder, that to use the word that stuck over your left shoulder there, that creative space, this create thing where I go, I wonder, how could we do that differently?
Yeah.
I need people around me who go, well, that's nice, but let's bring it back.
Yes.
So similarly with some of the engineering folk, because again, I know and love them as well, having grown up a bit more around that world, they are far more mechanical in their thinking.
Yeah.
Now, they can absolutely learn what you're talking to. The thing I think I see you doing is you're helping people learn skills around how to explore that further. And a part of it is, as a team, as a leader, kind of going, oh, gee, I need to, who do I talk to help me go there? Because sometimes you can't get there by yourself.
Yes.
And that's the beauty of a team and a business and an organization of folk. That curly thinking process, sometimes part of that, well, I'm assuming, and testing will be, Mary actually, she thinks out of the box a wee bit. I kind of need to go and have a chat with Mary and with Bob and with Margaret. And alternatively, Andrew, who's far too much out of the box, when he needs to come back in the box, needs to go and talk to whoever is in his world, Louise and Chris and others who, in my world, who make me go, oh, okay, back in the box in a good way. So there's a power of the whole as well, I'm assuming. With the curly thinking, it's not just one person.
No. And we were talking about the great podcast that you did with Callum and Curdy, and talking about diversity.
Callum.
Hello, Callum. We love you. But talking about the power of diversity, and one of the things that so neurodiversity particularly, and
Callum's
one of the challenges I think that businesses have and teams and leaders have is there's an emotional commitment. Yes, we need to value diversity. Conceptually, I get valuing diversity, whether, as you say, like neuro, gender, name it, on any level. The challenge is that from a thinking perspective, especially when you're in disruption, but other times as well, that different styles of thinking are really powerful at different points in a conversation. And, I think de Bono's thinking hats, this is probably the closest that I've seen where someone has got to this point of different perspectives at different times. What curly thinking does, or the if you get into the framework that sits underneath it as a skill, is that it says, if you think, again, framework of a mountain, that there are times on the mountain when you need the Andrew Dearings. And as a team and people that think in Andrew's style of thinking, and what the rest of the team needs to do is to recognize that we are here, which means the people who can shine are the Andrew Dearings in this space, because this is their superpower. And then you get to another part on the mountain, you move through the mountain and you get to another part. And sometimes then you need somebody else whose superpower is appropriate and supportive of where you are in your conversation. Because if you can do that as a leader, and then you get beyond the leader, you can do that as a team, what you get is a supercharged team, because everybody knows this is my superpower. I am going to step into this. And the people who are more A to B thinking, or for goodness sake, can we stop thinking and get the action happening? Right? Those people, you need those people to go from this conceptual stuff to something you can deliver and implement and get a result. But you need those people to relax and go, okay, this is where we are. I recognize we're going to get to the bit where we talk about the action bit, and that's my superpower, and I'm going to play there. But for now, I'm going to let Andrew talk, and I'm going to listen to his perspective and therefore we will capture that at each point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's absolutely, and I am the first person to say that I need different. I don't want to work with me. I would be a pain in the neck. But beyond that, I also know there are people who, like how I think, I need other people who do think a little differently to make the work we can do collectively so much better.
Yes.
And that is, and I also need to acknowledge them. And the business will only be better when part of my work is to acknowledge the differences that are there and celebrate them, and use them so that people are getting better. You're sharpening up the skills of the people who you're working with, and you're sharpening up collectively around how you do work. Really powerful. So with organizations, if we're talking to people kind of going, look, I get that. How do I work out who's who in the zoo in the team that I'm sitting in? How do we get there? Like I've got some, I think I can kind of see that Mary's a bit different from Bob's, a bit different from Margaret. But is there any ways to get to understanding that better?
That's a really good question. So how do you work? Like I've got 5 people in my team. Say, how do I work out where they are and what their superpower is and when they can step into their own? Is that kind of where you're coming from?
Yeah, even just forming that awareness of each other.
Yeah.
Unlocking the potential, I suppose, is the word. Because we're never going to make people better and get the business better, or vice versa, have the better business through better people without unlocking the potential inside.
Yeah. I think one of the things, well, it will always come back to questions, right? Just let me just position it. But and asking questions. One of the ways that I do it, and some of the leaders that I work with do it, is often we're so focused on doing the task or getting a task done and having a conversation that is around a task, that we kind of get into the, what do we need to do? How are we going to do it? Who's going to do it? When's it going to be done by? Right, done, action, gone. A different way or an additional way to do that is to have gone through that process for anything. It could be the smallest thing. And then you get to the end of the conversation and go, okay, I just want to pause for a minute. What were we thinking? What were each of you thinking as we went through that process? Which parts of that were you pleased to get to? And which parts did you feel that it might have run away with you, or like it was going too fast? Did it go too fast or too slow? Like, you can have all sorts of conversations encouraging people to reflect on themselves, to like it's I guess metacognition it's called. It's the ability to think about your thinking. So that bringing that into a conversation with a team can be really useful. Another thing is, one of the things is to know how you are, how you think to start with, because that will always be creating your lens through which you look at everybody else's thinking. So, for example, if you are someone that in a meeting just wishes that people would get to the point so we could move on, right? Or is listening to John over there, who seems to be repeating himself multiple times and saying the same thing again and again, and just get on with it, then that tells you something about the way that you think, and as much as it does about the way that John thinks. So if people take a while to get to a point, then the chances are that they are thinking and speaking at the same time. And as a lifelong curly thinker, I can tell that the reason that I do that is because unlike people who think a little bit differently to me, my thoughts aren't like a bunch of people getting off a bus, right? It's not that I've lined them all up in my head waiting to get off the bus. And when you get off the bus, they come out into the world.
Yep.
My thoughts are like a crowd rushing at a door. And therefore, the things that come out aren't always necessarily connected. And they might divert and things like that. So as a leader, being aware and being curious and listening not just to what people say, but how are they saying it will give you an insight to, if you think of a continuum, are they on the, and this is a dangerous thing to do because, boxes are not useful.
Yes, so handle with care, everybody. Handle with care. Nothing more than an example.
Stick labels on people.
Correct.
Are you the leader more on the A to B, straightforward, this is really logical, here's where we go perspective? Are you more on the further side, which is the more chaotic thinking? Now, in my world, curly thinking is how you get help people who are more A to B logically oriented to be more creative, curious. And curly thinking on this side is how you get people who are verbally thinking all the time to be more structured in their thinking, so that you can get people who are wherever they are on this spectrum of way of thinking and way of decision making and communicating to align so they can have a conversation and get stuff done.
It's good. And I'm thinking about a little chain here in my head. It's knowing self, always, Tim Atnosky, always know thyself. Important place to begin and end. And then as a first start, second part, know what's around you, the team, understand them. And I will also add a bit there, like the stuff that Kate just talked about, absolutely gold. Ask questions, create time to do it. Businesses are so busy rushing around doing stuff, they don't take time to do people. And it's important. And if you need help with that, obviously there's people like Kate who can come and help. There's also a bunch of different tools that are out there, the Myers-Briggses and the Working Geniuses and the Strengths and all that sort of stuff, which will also help if you're really kind of going, I don't know where I am or who I am. There's stuff out there to go and do. But once you do that, once you understand that, and once you're having some conversations, it's all about what I just heard you there. It's all about setting some common language, some common space where you can meet. So it's not ships in the night isn't happening. It's about having that meeting and being able to understand each other sufficiently that, because if you don't, better business, better people. Look, maybe this one, you're going there. Like it's, if you're doing this and you're having those pieces, the opportunity to understand better just goes up manifold, ridiculous. So, the percentage of chance just through the roof.
Yeah, and I love this point that you're making about this is that.
Sorry for everybody when I was doing my hands.
One
of the top ones
Andrew's
was about
moving his hands in a kind of
not connecting
in a way that suggests everybody missing each other.
The ships in the night story.
Ships in the night story. I think one of the things that I'd add to that, and it's this where we get stuck, and I can't remember if I mentioned it, but the where we get stuck is that in a disrupted environment, like in a smooth sailing, static environment, getting alignment is not always easy in itself, because we're talking people, we're talking humans and all of the things that come with that. But in a disrupted environment, you are even more likely to be missing each other and those ships zooming past each other in the night.
Absolutely.
Because the things that used to keep you together become disrupted. And therefore you need to find new things, and all of the things that you're talking about become even more important. Making the time becomes even more important because you don't have your foundations that you used to have.
Well, you don't, and let's call it out. Things like the flexible working arrangements that people have, the fact that there's sort of some folk are way less in the office than they ever used to be pre-COVID, like that type of stuff where you had the water cooler chat, you had the let's go grab a cup of coffee, you had the do you want to go and grab some lunch, you had all those things, which was some of the glue that helped people work with each other. Yeah. A lot of that's exited. We now need to be, and we kind of, there's this other adage around, well, people are way more productive now, and that, maybe I'm not going to go to that. But the piece that I do know is that without those incidentals or non-deliberates, we have to be deliberate. We have to have times to connect. And I'm not one for saying more meetings, please, but I am saying more connection, please. Yes. What does that mean for you? Because to get to the place of curly thinking, my assumption and everything I've heard you talk to, curly thinking you can't get to that place if you have no connection. No common ground, no shared agenda, no direction. Like you can be individually as thinking at curly space as much as you want. Yes. Better people, better business, the collectivism there needs the join, needs the community, needs the tribe, needs the whatever. Yeah.
And I'd even add to that is that the way that curly thinking, like if I had to capture it in a nutshell, the way that curly thinking works is it creates a bridge between what you know and what you don't. And it enables you to go outside to find new answers and then find a way back so you can implement them. And while I would argue that going through, take the challenge of workplace changes and different ways of working and all of those sorts of things, I'd actually argue that curly thinking and curly conversations is a mechanism through which you can create those connections. And the challenge that I find some leaders encounter, and this is tough stuff, right? It's not simple, but the challenge is that sometimes when we try to have conversations, we try to have them too early. We need to have an earlier conversation. You need to start sooner in the conversation. Work your way back down the mountain to start with people and have a small curly conversation there and get some alignment in terms of that chunking. Often people try to say, okay, well, right, we're going to do everything differently. Let's have a really big conversation. And people go, whoa, gee, I don't want to go there.
And part of that is, won't go down the rabbit hole too far today, but part of that is, to use a common term these days, the Amy brain's not working, but psychological safety.
Yeah, Amy Silver does some great work.
Yeah, Amy Silver does, and I was thinking the other Amy as well. Brain's not working. It's just not there today. But it is that piece going back down the mountain allows some safety in conversation. Because if you are going somewhere a little different, a little new, people will take a little bit of time to get used to that. Some stuff you'll crash through a wee bit, but most stuff will just take people a bit of time, and that's okay. Be generous and be gentle in that moment. It's really important. Take a kind approach to how collectively you go. And I will say some of my team do listen to this podcast, and I'll probably be chuckling at the moment going, gosh, I hope Andrew heard that bit. Because I am known to be going, right, let's change everything, just slow down. Let's just slow down. Okay, no worries. Thank you, people.
Thanks for your feedback.
Yes. Oh, and brave enough, or to be able to say, not brave is probably the wrong word, but courageous enough, to use a Corinna Moore word, to kind of go, hang on a minute, mate. And I think it's important. Better people, again, harper back, better people, better business. They are willing to do those things, the less comfortable things, and the leader is willing to slow down to give the right type of pace for people to keep up. And I'm not saying go to the old adage, got to work to the lowest common denominator. If your lowest common denominator isn't right, then that's another conversation. You probably need to fix that, but you need to work back to a pace that's useful for the team.
Yeah. And to build on your point about language, so and picking on that, lowest common denominator, to as soon as we think lowest common denominator, there's a whole heap of assumptions and judgments that come with that. Yeah. And I think one of the challenges and opportunities is that when we recognize that I'm not going to judge you because you're on a different side of the mountain, it's just the way it is. And we accept that rather than get all het up with why aren't you on my side of the mountain?
Because mine's the right side, yours isn't.
Mine is the right side, and it's obviously where we are, although it's not obviously where we are. Yeah. It enables you to have that kind of conversation.
It does. It's powerful. And I think I'm mindful of time, and we can talk for a long time and have been known to.
We can talk a long time, and we have.
and I think the tie in there that I think is really powerful for people who are leading teams or are being led in teams, because usually that's both in some level, or leading self. There's this piece around, some of the stuff Kate's talked to today is around, the heart of what I keep hearing is curiosity and questions, and doing that lots. And I think that sits beside that is for leaders and for self is to also have a level of vulnerability inside that space. Just allow a little bit of room for people to bump around in there, maybe the dodging cars. And it's okay. The dodging cars have bumpers on. That's why they have bumpers. Because they are and can bump into each other. Because we're all learning this thing called life. Curly thinking is one way that we can help accelerate the learning to get better outcomes. And I think it's really powerful.
Yeah. And just with the other thing in terms of the disruption that I'm very passionate about is you can see disruption as being a bad thing. And that doesn't, I'm not understating, as I was talking about with my house, disruption is disruptive. However, it's also in disruption that opportunity comes. And my goal in sharing the Curly thinking approach and the way of doing things is to get people far enough beyond that disruptive feeling to see the opportunity that is there, because it is there. You just need to get far enough and not revert back or hold on to what was. But yeah. And the other thing that your listeners to the podcast might find useful is that there's an audio series that's out that I've just done. It's called Get Unstuck. And if they want to go and check that out, it's available to understand. It talks about how you can go through and work through a disruption. So if you're wanting the practical application of Curly thinking, they can go and check that out as well.
That's gold. And we will put, here I am pointing again and people are listening, we will put that in the show notes underneath this. So as we end, I always ask people a couple of last things. The last question, which I hadn't prepped you for again.
This is where I go, I hope I can answer it really quickly.
I'm sure you can. The question is quite simply, if for all these people, about to turn off and go on with life or do whatever, what's the one thing you'd love to leave them with that they can do, think, hear, that will help them in their day from your perspective and your wisdom?
One thing.
Sorry, I'm going to cut your list back on this one.
you should just see the avalanche of stuff that is just headed towards the door. I would say to trust yourself, to trust that you will find a way, and that asking questions with an intention. So before you do anything, ask, what question do I need to answer right now? And by asking that, what you do is you take your brain off action mode and switch it into that focused mode that I talked about before. What question do I need to answer? And just doing that, it doesn't matter. You don't have to come up with the right question that you're answering, but just by the fact that you do it, it will help you to go, oh, okay, what now? Yeah, that's
good, useful.
That's off the top of my head.
Thank you. And I was just going to cheekily say you did slip two in there, but that was, I knew as soon as I said it that there was never going to just be one.
You've got no idea how much I am holding back.
And so for people who want to hear you, get to know you, one of the things you talked about was this new audio series that you're bringing out that's available for people to access. Yes. So we'll put that in. Yes. Where else can they go to find out more about Kate Christiansen?
They can go to www.katechristiansen.com.au.
Cool.
Find me on LinkedIn. All the usual posies. But
social media
go
things.
to the website.
And always open for conversation and always open to continue this one. Thank you, Kate. Your wisdom and your conversation was fun. And I think there's a bunch of stuff that people can walk away with. And again, my comment would be, going to that one thing. And if you just think about the world in a way, a curly thinking way, and about how to think a little differently. And if that sounds challenging, please jump on the audio stuff that Kate's put out there. It will help a lot. It's there. Use it. And if you want to know more, reach out and have the conversation. I'm sure she'd love to take you on a journey of understanding how you can be better. So thank you for being on the podcast on Better People, Better Business. Kate Christiansen, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. It's been fun.
It has. And all the folk out there listening, really appreciate your time. I hope this has added value. I hope you have a cracking week. And just remember the old adage that I often talk about, and sometimes forwards, sometimes backwards, but always onwards. And I hope this has helped you with your onwards piece. Have a great day.